The expected signing of a white former NFL player who hasn't played pro football in nearly a decade and who some have regarded as a failure during his time in the league has renewed outrage over the apparent refusal to give Colin Kaepernick a second chance on the gridiron.
After news broke that Tim Tebow would reportedly sign with the Jacksonville Jaguars, people could not help but point out the injustice that Colin Kaepernick still does not have a job. While Tebow's one-year deal would see him play tight end for the Jacksonville Jaguars, it does feel like he received more than enough opportunities to prove he can play in the NFL. The same can be said for Kaepernick, who was blackballed by the NFL after peacefully protesting racial inequality.
So joining us today is our contributors. They're no strangers to you all. We have our sister attorney, Sadiyah Karriem, and our brother, Dr. Gary Clark. Thank you all for joining us again.
Thank you for having us.
So we'll get right to it, and we'll start with you, Brother Clark, and then we'll get right to our sister. So is this just as it relates to Tim Tebow? Is this just a player being given another chance by his coach, or is it another manifestation of white privilege from your perspective?
It appears as though you answered the question yourself, because it is indeed a manifestation. Well, you know, Ralph Miliband wrote years ago that what exists in terms of our American society is that we have and live in a sports culture. When I talk to many individuals that I know who are former NFL players, the few that I know, there's one common thread that they talk about: the fact that you have to understand the politics of sports and the politics of the NFL. And we all can see right now, as a professor of political science, we see that this is indeed a manifestation of the political economy, how individuals approach sport, how sport itself is approached in American society. And it is, for all intents and purposes, blatant, it is explicit, and it is something that for many individuals, unless who even live in Jacksonville, the hometown of Tim Tebow, who express surprise and outrage. But then again, there are those who perhaps will recognize that this is indeed just part and parcel to the course.
Wow. And what do you have to say, attorney? What do you think? Is this white privilege, or he's just benefiting from his relationship with his coach?
It's actually white privilege that he is benefiting. That's what white privilege is all about, is benefiting from their white relationships. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at Tebow, you know, he was known for taking the knee to express his religious views. And so you have our dear brother Kaepernick, who expressed his views as it concerns police racial injustice, and he was ostracized and he was blackballed because of it. So there's a hypocrisy with that as well. And so now you have this player who barely, his last two teams that he played for, he barely got any playing time, and he was a quarterback. Now he's a tight end, and he's getting an opportunity based on his white privilege in the NFL. And although the commissioner said eventually, especially with all the racial uprising, that they got it wrong, right? But if you got it wrong, then you got to make it right. And so you have to bring this brother back, but they chose not to. And, you know, I'm looking at what the sports media is saying, that there is no difference between the two. It's just a coach who is allowing an opportunity for him as former player. But they're trying to gaslight us, Black America, to make us believe that there is no difference between the two, when it is absolutely the hypocrisy and racism and systemic racism in the NFL showing its true colors.
Wow. So Dr. Clark, Sister Karriem mentioned about Kaepernick, right? And him taking the knee. And throughout this whole ordeal, Kaepernick has been quiet. You saw when Muhammad Ali was going through what he went through, he spoke up. So is Kaepernick's silence helping him or hurting him?
Well, this is, again, a different generation. And you have to approach this as what I don't want to say advantages that the particular individual, but Kaepernick is doing what he feels as though he should do in this particular political environment. But what I would say is that, yes, is that right now it is speaking for itself. Everything is speaking for itself. Kaepernick took a knee for for racial injustice. Whereas you find that Tebow, when the one time he did take a knee, it was said he did it because he was anti-abortion and did not like what the flag represented. Well, given all of that and given what we do understand, we know that there's a bigger question. The bigger question is African American coaches, African American offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators. That's the larger question. And so by what's taking place now, that we're seeing a manifestation of the larger issue. It's a ripple effect. And Kaepernick, the approach he's taken, we can't argue with that, with what he's doing.
So what, Sister Sadiyah, what do you think? Because, you know, I would think that this would be a time where Kaepernick would be in front of the media pointing out the blatant double standard.
You know, we would think as Black America, we would think that is the case. But when you look at the makeup of the NFL team, 70% are Black bodies. So it's like slavery, you know, they're capitalizing off the marginalization, the commoditization, and, you know, the exploitation of Black bodies. When you look at management, only 9% are people of color. And then when you look at who the owners and the CEOs, 0% are Black or other colors outside of white. So NFL is systematically benefiting from systemic racism, and they're the ones who get to make the rules. So if they wanted Kaepernick to come back, they would have. But what they're really doing is they're letting the rest of the Negroes on the team, the slaves on the team, you can't speak out. This is your place. If you want to get paid, then you need to dumb yourself down and present your body to the world.
Mm-hmm. And in the midst of while this is going on, Tim Tebow being given another chance, you all have mentioned how the lack of Black ownership. There's also an article that came out that showed Black NFL sports agents talk about how they have a hard time or not even given the opportunity to even offer their services to represent white players in the NFL. Dr. Clark, do you see a connection between all of these topics?
Well, it's all of it is inherently linked. What I would suggest to you is that Kaepernick, this is a race which we all run, which is a powerful race. Kaepernick has run his race. He's done the needed and the necessary. It's up to those of us in society to do the other parts of the race that he has done. And yes, absolutely, you're correct that there are indeed dilemmas that exist out there. And so I think it's imperative that we recognize how all of these particular issues are inherently linked. And that's the role that you, Sister Sadiyah, and that you, Brother Willie, play, is that you also working with this network, that you work to provide the linkages for those individuals who may not have the time to sit there and pay attention. And those who may not be public intellectuals, those who may not have, rather than the time, and there are some who may not have the capacity. And so what happens then is that it's the role that's played right now is to provide the linkages as for everyone to see.
So, Sister Sadiyah, you mentioned about the analogy or the description about how the football NFLs kind of still have that like slave and slave master, right? And many people ask the question when they go back and look at slavery, how is it that these few slave masters could rule all of these people? So I want to ask the question, how is it that the majority of the players are Black and they're seeing this with this latest example with Tim Tebow? Why do you think there's not a larger backlash that's from those players?
I mean, it's a mindset. So you have to attack the mind before you attack the body. That's what slavery was about as well. So when we talk about the Willie Lynch mentality. And so you take these young boys who are in this impoverished neighborhoods and you give them this hope and this light and inspiration to be somebody. But then when they get in the institution, this racist institution, they're put in their place. And, when you look at the patrons of the NFL or these sports, you see that 35% are African-American. Let's not count our brown brothers and sisters as well. And so, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us that we must separate. If we got to do for self and separate. And so instead of contributing our money to this racist institution, we're talking about sports and play as well. So it's dumbing us down. It's making us focus on other things in culture and high civilization. But if we want sport and play, then we have to create it for ourselves. I know about a year ago, there was talk about Oakland being owner, majority owner, but it never came to fruition. And so we have to step back from this, realize that we don't need their NFL, and we can create something for ourselves. But until our mindset changes, this is what we're going to see inside the NFL with our brothers, and outside as well with the people who patronize the marginalization, the commodification, and the exploitation of our brothers in this particular sport.
And Dr. Clark, thank you, Sister. Dr. Clark, you mentioned about how we live in a different generation. Do you think that the athletes of today are less politically aware and conscious than the athletes during the time of Jim Brown, Muhammad Ali, and the others?
Well, the moment dictates your response. And right now, we discovered that this particular generation is responding in the same form and fashion that the Jim Browns and the Lou Alcindors, the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar of the world did, and they're responding in kind. Let me say this as well: is that there is and I say sport is politics. When you go into the NFL, you've got to take examinations. You've got to see if you quote unquote fit. There's a certain mentality and a certain type of individual they want on the team, and a certain player that they want. And I talk to many people all the time, former players and players who say, yes, I'm in the NFL, but guess what? I have a brother at home who's just as good as me, actually better than I am. But this is not for him because he doesn't want to be involved in the politics. He understands that what the sort of player and mindset that one wants on a particular team. And the teams are different, but there's one common denominator, and that's you've got to be a part of this process. And so what's taking place now, when African Americans and other people of color recognize the strength and value that you have, it's going to change. Well, and I go back to my generation. I was a youngster. We had Kurt Flood in baseball, and he helped change how blacks and the power that blacks had as a player. So that's about to happen again, and we're about to see it.
Thank you. And I appreciate all of what you all have shared. And I'm looking forward to this next segment we're going to talk about. So we're going to pause for these announcements from our sponsors. But when we return, our contributors will talk about Hollywood, whether or not Hollywood has this obsession with Black trauma stories. We'll be right back.
Be a part of the force that powers truth in journalism. Go to nnvnews.com/donate.
Worldwide, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Download the Final Call Radio app and take us everywhere. On your phone, on your computer, on your tablet, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also log on to finalcall.com and click the Listen Live button, or finalcallradio.com. Final Call Radio, the official voice of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam.
Please share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. Follow us on social media at NNV News, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel at National Network View. I am Anissa Muhammad with nnvnews.com.
So the reviews and feedback from the newest Amazon Prime television show, Them, raised a huge question about Hollywood's obsession with Black trauma in movies and in TV shows. Black trauma, also known as racial trauma, refers to the mental and emotional injury caused by encounters with racial bias and ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes. Many users on social media were some of the first to point out the countless amounts of films, and TV shows centered around Black trauma?
These Black trauma films and TV shows could be something that's centered around things like slavery, police brutality, racism, and the list goes on, which the TV show Them had a lot of traumatizing things in it. The Oscar-nominated live-action short Two Distant Strangers, which premiered on Netflix the same day as Them arrived on Amazon Prime, has raised similar questions with its story of a young Black man trapped in a Groundhog Day style cycle with a white cop who delights in killing him over and over again. The growing fervor around Them, The Two Distant Strangers, and American Skin and other Hollywood projects contain horrific images of mayhem, maiming, and murder directed at Black people has given a new life to the debate over what many have characterized as Black trauma porn.
So we'll start off with our sister attorney, Sadiyah. So could the impact of watching more and more of these Black sufferings on the screen have a more devastating impact that outweighs the attempt to increase Black representation on the silver screen? What I mean by that is there are people who say, yeah, it's Black trauma, but at least we have now more Black representation on the silver screen. But can that be outweigh the representation?
So, that's an excellent question. We're in essence asking for something that really harms us, just so that we can be a part of the game. So, when you look at the psychology behind these Black pain movies or Black trauma movies, what it really does is it triggers the more trauma that Black people are already suffering. And Hollywood is capitalizing off of it in such a great way. If you look at the history of Black movies in the Academy, most of them are dealing with police brutality, slavery, or some social injustice inflicted upon Black America. You don't see images of Black excellence or Black expression. And when we did get a movie, Wakanda, that gave us Black expression and Black excellence, you see how it was good for the market, for the blockbuster market. However, it's hard to see that again. And so, especially with the racial uprisings that we have, it's constantly triggering the mental health or the mental trauma that Black people are experiencing. I just saw a clip from Dr. Keeling. He talked about the mental health and how it's decreasing or exacerbating based on what's going on in the dispensation of time. It's not an accident. None of this is an accident. And so if you tap into the trauma of Black people, then you desensitize them, then white America is looking at these particular movies, and it has them primed up and revved up in order to take action against us as well. Kind of like a silent race war, and you're using Hollywood and Black trauma to do it. And I applaud the producers and the movie makers who decide that no more Black porn or no more Black pain. But again, as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad told us, we have to separate from this enemy, and we have to do for ourselves and create for ourselves, because our narrative is not just trauma. That's America's narrative about Black people. But the original Black man, we have excellence and expression of culture. And what we're seeing on the big screen is not it.
And what do you say? Thank you, sis. What do you say, Dr. Clark? Do you think this continuing show of Black trauma outweighs the benefit of Black representation?
Well, my initial response would be that, we live in a period of trauma within right now in this particular period within the African American experience. But then when you take a broader look at it, and the professionals who look at Hollywood, the professionals who observe it, say, wait, no, it's not just a period of trauma. What we have right now is the fact that we historically, all of the producers, the Black writers, directors, the ones who have been nominated for awards have been individuals who have been a part of this historically trauma. I had an uncle, a great uncle, should I say. He died at the age of 107. And he was beloved by the family. And there's one thing that I recognized from him. That was the fact that he refused to look at movies that had pain, Color Purple, et cetera, regardless of how great they may have been. He just refused to look at it. And I understand now, and I understand why he had this refusal, because it was too much of the exaggeration of the Black experience. And yes, it does have a degenerative effect, because we go to movies, we go to film for one reason. We like escapism. And we like to, and yes, we may want to see documentaries and all these other et cetera, but the film provides a form of escapism for everyone. And we want to see diversity reflected within the African American, also the people of color experience. And drama does not do that.
Wow, it's as interesting. We go there for escapism, but we find the same thing. Which just brings me to this question, where it falls on us, like movies, Queen and Slim. We've seen examples where Black people are behind the camera writing the scripts. So my question to you all is, why is it that Black creatives appearing to have a difficult time writing scripts where Black characters ride off in the sunset after accomplishing some magnificent feat that was viewed as impossible?
We don't own Hollywood. The reality is Hollywood has its own personal agenda. We know this for sure. And the creators of Hollywood, if you look at the history, there's always some kind of a hidden agenda or hidden story that they want America to abide by. And so when you continuously play these pain, trauma movies, you know, you're sending a message to Black America, and you're sending a message, a silent message to white America as well. And you're dehumanizing Black people. You know, we all day long, we're on social media and we see all the injustices of police brutality and our brothers and sisters getting killed. And then when we want to go sit down, of course, you talked about the escapism. And here again, it's the steady needle at the trauma of Black people. Post-traumatic slavery is real. That epigenetics and being able to turn and turn on certain parts of your genetic system is real. And anytime the physical and the mental aspect of watching these trauma movies is a horror story. And so what happens? You know, the person is experiencing PTSD. If they don't already have it, then they're triggered. Then, you know, people with high blood pressure, you look at them, the physical health of the person begins to decline. So if you step back and you take an eagle's eye view and look at the reality of what Hollywood is giving us, it is no accident that they're spoon feeding us trauma on purpose.
And so what do you say, Attorney Sadiyah, she mentioned about the success of Black Panther. And as I thought about it, I can only remember that movie and the other movie that's made by a white person, Django, where Black folks like really won. So why is it that we're still seeing, even though Black folks are behind the camera, there's this reluctance for us to write us off where we end up winning in the end?
Well, whether they're behind the camera or not, are they the producers? You see, and they're directing what the producers tell them. And so what happens again is that until you own your own and produce your own, then you can expect the response to be dilatory. That's just the nature of the beast. And so for all intents and purposes, there is no moral dilemma when it comes to white America and the production of movies and Black trauma. And so the response has to be with what we as a people would pay to see, what we as a people decide that we want to see. And because some things can very well be market driven once you determine the market. And we know there are certain things, certain type of music we want to hear, certain type of movies we want, and there's certain sort of heroes that we want to see manifested on the big screen.
So, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. I'll go to this question with you, Attorney Sadiyah. So we have our brother in Atlanta, Tyler Perry, right, who has his own studio. Like, what would it take for our Black creatives to get together and to begin to start producing that type of content, and can even begin to start creating that type of appetite within the Black community where we want to see us in more positive roles?
You know, the bottom line is love for self. And what we see is the hatred of self, or we see that which white society has put upon us. We think white is right. We think buffoonery. We think modern day Black face is okay by Black faces, and it's not. And so when we realize the magnitude of these particular type of films and how it wrecks our mental aspect. I remember a study that was done when back in civil rights movement, where they put the two dials, the Black dial and the white dial, and all the Black children were picking the white dials, right? And so as producers and movie makers, we have to be able to create our own narrative and stick to it and not worry about the fact that we may be funded by Hollywood or by some Jewish organization or be called out by a Jewish organization who we believe controls the narrative. And so again, you know, as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, that we have to do for ourselves and suffer the consequences. And right now we're selling ourselves out. We're not being ourselves and doing for ourselves, and we are suffering the consequences.
Once again, very, very great commentary from both of you all. So we're approaching our last segment. We're going to pause for some announcements, but when we come back, we're going to talk about this George Floyd police reform bill and a statement that was recently made by James E. Clyburn. We'll be right back.
Be a part of the force that powers truth in journalism. Your support helps to combat false media. Cash App NNV News.
Greetings from National Network View. This week's Final Call cover story headline memorializes the late, great DMX. Last week, DMX's life was celebrated at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. Large crowds gathered to honor the legend. They were there to remember a man who wasn't afraid to express his pain with the world. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan spoke via Zoom to the large audience. He delivered words of comfort, wisdom, and guidance to everyone under the sound of his voice. DMX will live on. This FCM volume number 29 edition features the middle page article is a transcript of what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said at the memorial. To read more, subscribe to finalcalldigital.com and tune in to the all-new Final Call Radio. This is the nnvnews.com Final Call cover report.
This is Sister Sadiyah Muhammad. We are proud to announce that the Sadiyah House commemorative Elijah coins are finally here. This priceless heirloom, made from recycled copper from the messenger's home, is now available at sadiyahhouse.com.
Please make sure you leave your comments and questions in the comment section below. Follow us on Facebook, National Network View, and make sure to check us out on Twitter as well, National Network View. This is Sergio Gutierrez with National Network View, signing off.
In an appearance on the CNN State of the Union, host Jake Tapper said that this tentative agreement of police reform legislation is in Congress, but he noted that the main sticking point involves around this thing called qualified immunity, right? So House Majority Whip James Clyburn from South Carolina during sometime last week, he said he's willing to compromise on the qualified immunity in order to pass this police reforming bill through Congress with bipartisan support.
The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act was passed by the House of Representatives just last month. The police overhaul legislation needs 60 votes under the current Senate rules to pass in the Senate, and it can't do it without votes from Republicans. Republican Senator Tim Scott is involved in informal talks with Democratic Senator Cory Booker to outline a Senate version of the bill. Floyd's family is calling on Washington to act quickly.
We have to pass the George Floyd Policing Act. We have to stick together and continue to fight.
Right now, a key sticking point is what's called qualified immunity. You might have heard about this. It essentially protects law enforcement officers if action is taken against them in civil court. The next step in this process would be formal negotiations in the U.S. Senate.
So we'll start with you, with our sister Sadiyah. So basically, we'll go with both of y'all. Start with Sister Sadiyah. James Clyburn, he basically said that he's willing to compromise that qualified immunity not being a part of this legislation in order to pass the larger bill. What are your thoughts on that?
So in his compromise, what you're creating is a bill that's toothless and has no bite at all. And so the qualified immunity is the most important aspect of this bill, because not only is it real police reform, but it's real police accountability. You know, this is just window dressing for the Republicans. The Republicans want us to believe that it's just a few bad apples in the police department, and that the whole police department, there's no problem or systemic racism problem that is attributed to that particular institution, which there is when you look at the inception of it. And so when you have an officer who pretty much, and unless there's some extreme case that is very difficult to prove in court, then all they do is get a slap on the wrist, and there is no individual accountability. And so with this particular reform bill, okay, so you have no knock warrants. You abolish that. You abolish the chokeholds. But as you saw with Eric Garner with the abolishing the chokeholds in New York NYPD, he didn't abide by that. It was more of a mere suggestion, and he violated their policy on that. So if you have a bill that will make sure that these particular officers are individually responsible, then they'll have second thoughts about trying to take away someone's rights and kill them, and the Supreme Court justice, they knew this in advance, and Congress has to do the right thing. The Senate has to do the right thing, because we know that the U.S. Supreme Court is not going to repeal itself. So we have the 1983 legislation, the code says any rights, not just what the judge says, but any rights. And so when that right is violated, that goes for any rights. And you gotta make the officer individually responsible, or there's no real accountability.
Thank you. What do you say, Doc? So do you think that Clyburn, what's your view on his position?
Well, I'm just happy to be following Sister Sadiyah, because she worked in Washington. She works with the Obama administration. She understands how Washington actually operates. And yes, without that, it indeed will be toothless. But guess what? And looking at the bill, there are two things which become important. Under the qualified immunity is two aspects to it. It's dovetail. One is the civil aspect and the civil liability that would protect the officers, and the other is the criminal aspect that would protect the officers. And so these officers don't want to go out there and do great harm to someone and then be subject to civil liability, and then great harm and then be subject to criminal liability. And so and that's what this thing is all about. But what I find is that Representative Clyburn from South Carolina, and you have Senator Scott, who is African American from South Carolina. And so those two individuals, they know. I see this as more of a trial balloon to see how this is going to manage, how it's going to be accepted within the community. And it's good that there are individuals now saying we don't want it, we don't like it, we don't think that it can be accepted. And so Clyburn is saying, wait a minute, the key person here that we have to pay attention to is not necessarily Representative Clyburn, but the key person is Senator Tim Scott. And if Tim Scott can push this through and say we've got to get it, and we can go with the National Registry for Police Misconduct. We can go for all the other things, reporting to the DOJ. All those are things that administrative activities that one can adhere to. But if that goes through, it to me, for my purposes, it should be a no-brainer. And guess what else? My final statement is what's going to happen is that these bad officers will either leave or they will either heighten their insurance on the floor.
It's interesting that you talked about bad officers, because also in the reports that I read, James Clyburn also talks about how he believes that the recruitment of good people will help to produce a viable solution to reforming the police force. So Attorney Karriem, what do you think about that? Is the solution of reforming the police recruiting good people?
That's one aspect of it, is recruiting of good people. But you have to pull the cover back from the system that was created in order to marginalize a particular people and attack and prey on a particular people. And I'm talking about the Black and the brown and the minority. So with the bill, there's some good aspects of it. Yes, we have, they want a national registry now so that it can be transparent about these officers, because they could be held accountable in their police department and then leave and go to another police department or get a slap on the wrist. Now we get to see publicly these officers' records, especially when you're dealing with police brutality. But that's not enough. That's window dressing. So you give us crumbs, making us think that you're really giving us something. And that the reality is Black people have been given crumbs for so long. And so all they're doing is presenting it on a different plate. The reality is in order to have real police reform, in order to have real police accountability, the qualified immunity has to be repealed, and Congress can do something about it. We should not, as Black people, as minority people, as marginalized people, we should not accept anything that they just give us, light of getting rid of qualified immunity. And I believe it's Bill 242, Section 242, where it reduces the burden of proof in order to find these police officers, these quote unquote bad police officers, with a lighter burden of proof, so that we can convict more officers who are violating people's rights.
Thank you. And so, Dr. Clark, you teach political science at the campus on Dillard University. What advice can you give to the viewers of what they can do, or how they can get, put pressure or express their concern to their local politicians about how important it is that this qualified immunity remains in this bill? Is there anything that can be done, like from a person here in Louisiana?
Well, in this particular case, because the value now relies in the Senate, so you've got to contact your senators. And many of these states in the South, Louisiana is one of those states. There's no politician can get elected, because we are African Americans are 1/3 of the electorate. There's no politician that can get elected statewide without Black support. And it's like that throughout the South. And so those Southern politicos, senators, you can apply pressure to them, especially those who are facing re-election, and let them know that it's time now to step up. And this is something that, for all intents and purposes, it's not just something that affects Black and brown people, but at some point it's going to affect white America as well. And so you've got to make sure that as a political, that you've got, as someone in the electorate, you've got to address that by contacting your senators and applying pressure to them. And my final statement is not only do you have to pay attention to individuals when they come into the force, but you must also pay attention to the psychological profile of individuals who carry weapons. And that's a test that should be given to every police officer, and it should be given in a rotating basis, not just when they come in, but continuously.
Great point. And you that makes me lead to this next question. Sister Sadiyah, you mentioned about using the example of New York, how I think something was banned, but the police the chokehold was banned, but they still used it, right? And one of the defenses that was used in the recent trial of the Derek Chauvin, they kept talking about his training. So let's say, for example, that the George Floyd Policing Act is passed. Does it have the strength to counter, quote unquote, the training or even the mindset that Dr. Clark just mentioned about how the psychology of some of these officers?
But you're going to have to clean the whole department. You're going to have to clean the whole system. You're going to have to revamp the whole racist system of the police department. And so they come with a particular ideology. We saw when the storming of the Capitol, a lot of those people who stormed the Capitol was law enforcement. So covertly, they have a particular leaning and ideology as it concerns Black America. We just talked about the trauma films. There's hidden messages in that as well, for them to come out or be silent or use their uniform in silence to attack Black people. So, psychologically, yes, but it's the whole system that we have to deal with, because the whole system is rotten.
We'll come back to you, Dr. Clark. So with that, you have the police, you have the George Floyd Policing Act, but then you still have this system, this training that it keeps producing the same. You see the same stuff, especially with Black folks. So how does it balance out? Would the George Floyd Policing Act be able to significantly impact that?
Well, actually, it is a beginning, because it's a federal law. And it would be a federal law, and that's from the top down, because we know about the nature of the federal system that we have to deal with all of these police departments. But when it comes down to the reality, it's criminal justice is finding individuals who are good people who go into the criminal justice system. And it's a process. It's for all intents and purposes, it's going to take a generation. And it's going to take a generation, and we got to also recognize that it's not just individuals who are white Americans. We got to make sure we bring good, solid, substantial black and brown people in who understand, who don't just want to just carry a gun to suppress their own people. So we must understand that as well.
Wow, that's another aspect as well. And I know we kind of talked about it, but Sister Sadiyah, can you explain for the viewing audience just exactly what is meant by when we talk about qualified immunity? What does that mean?
Yes, sir. So it's a judge-made rule in which individual cops or law enforcement, period, if they violate your rights, there has to be extreme cases where they will be held liable. And it's very case specific. It's very jurisdiction specific. And so the reality of it is that hardly any law enforcement or officers find liability through qualified immunity. You know, there have been cases where officers have there was no liability for officers who, you know, stole from the scenes or had their canine animals savagely beat and bite the individual, or just what we've been seeing in the past, where officers can use excessive force and kill black and brown people and they get off. That's just the reality in America, and they hide behind this particular law that Supreme Court set up just for them.
Wow. And Doc, we'll close out with you on this. The closing. Do you think in the end, will this George Floyd Policing Act make it through the system?
Well, that's the hope and expectation that it goes through the system in the form that we want. We want to ensure that we can get the qualified immunity through. Now, this is not the first time this has happened. There's been many attempts to end this, and so we want to make sure that it can end now. This by far is one of the best times that I know in recent history that we can end this process. And so that's the hope and expectation that this Policing Act will go through. And while we have somebody in the executive branch that wants to see it done, we have a Congress that wants to see it done. And so now we just have the Senate that needs to make it happen.
What do you say, sister? What do you say,
and Brother
sister?
Willie, let me say this. Mm-hmm. You know, all we're doing is hoping as Black people, and we're hoping on this American justice system. But the reality is, until we separate and we create a system of our own and do for ourselves, then we're going to continue to hope and pray that we may get some justice in America.
Thank you all. Both of you all, as always, have contributed great commentary. Look forward to you all every time you all come. Thank everybody for tuning in, and we encourage others to make sure that you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. We're not doing this out of vanity, but it helps with the algorithms, as they say. So we thank you all for joining us today and tuning into the National Network View, this news station, and we please share your thoughts in the commentary. We thank those who have been doing so, and also follow us on social media, NNV News. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, also at NNV News. And this is Willie Muhammad with National Network News. Peace.
Be a part of the force that powers truth in journalism. Go to nnvnews.com/donate.